It is winter, 48 BC. A Roman army under the command of Gaius Julius Caesar marches relentlessly against the forces of the Egyptian-Ptolemaic kingdom. Only months earlier, Caesar had defeated his rival Pompey the Great at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey fled across the Mediterranean, seeking refuge in Egypt, believing the Ptolemaic kingdom owed him gratitude for years of Roman support. Instead, they murdered him. Caesar was infuriated. He considered Pompey's murder an act of barbarism. Worse still, Egypt had inserted itself into Rome's civil war. Caesar had arrived in Alexandria with only a few thousand legionaries. He had not come to conquer Egypt. He had come only to settle Rome's affairs. Instead, he found himself trapped in yet another war entirely. After the death of Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII became joint rulers. But a power struggle led by Ptolemy's advisors forced Cleopatra into exile. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria to mediate the dispute, the advisors rejected Roman intervention, sparking the Alexandrian War. Outnumbered, Caesar defended the royal quarter through months of brutal urban fighting, enduring shortages of food and fresh water, while narrowly escaping death on several occasions. The situation changed when Mithridates of Pergamon led a relief army into Egypt, prompting Caesar to break out of Alexandria and join his reinforcements. Realizing the threat, Ptolemy's forces rushed to intercept the advancing Romans, setting the stage here for the decisive Battle of the Nile. Caesar deployed his legions for battle, whilst simultaneously using them as a distraction for his Germanic auxiliary cavalry to cross much farther up the riverbank, unseen by the enemy. They positioned themselves in an advantageous position and waited for their general's signal. Ancient sources do not preserve every detail of the deployment, but they indicate that the Egyptian-Ptolemaic force occupied strong defensive positions along the river. At the point where the Romans had planned a crossing, the Egyptian-Ptolemaic troops formed a defensive perimeter at the shallowest point of the river to contest Caesar's forces. Once his men were in position, the Roman legions advanced on the crossing. Amongst Caesar's force were his veteran legionaries, hardened by years of campaigning in Gaul and the Roman Civil War, undoubtedly his best soldiers. The soldiers for the Egyptian-Ptolemaic forces were made up of Egyptian infantry, Greek mercenaries, cavalry, and numerous light troops. With the narrow pass taken into consideration, it was a defensive force big enough to prevent the Romans from crossing. The Roman legions pressed hard, with good cohesion, but the enemy numbers and positioning granted them the ability to stand firm against Caesar's superior soldiers. The Ptolemaic forces committed more troops, pinning the Romans in place. The fighting became a sluggish, chaotic mess. But this is exactly what Caesar had planned for. As soon as he saw that the enemy had committed all their attention and manpower, he gave the signal. His Germanic cavalry galloped forward into the fray. Seemingly unaware of the maneuver, the Ptolemaic troops cluelessly fought on. The Germanic riders smashed into the rear of the enemy ranks, which was enough to cause a mass panic, leading to a full-scale rout. Caesar had succeeded in breaking through the blockade, and now marched his legions along the Nile Delta to meet with his allied army. Linking up with Mithridates of Pergamon, Caesar's entire force was significantly bolstered, but still reported as considerably smaller compared to Ptolemy XIII's force. The main Egyptian-Ptolemaic army held a strong defensive position near one of the branches of the Nile. The area was elevated, with raised embankments and natural obstacles which provided excellent fortifications. Ptolemy's more experienced commander believed Caesar would attack frontally, so in addition they constructed a series of barriers to slow the Roman army should they mount an offensive uphill. Caesar's army was outnumbered and faced an opponent in a far superior defensive position. Although a talented commander who had overcome more difficult situations in past battles, notably at the Battle of Alesia, this particular situation called for a more resolute approach, and Caesar knew it. Prior to engaging, he and his commanders scanned the enemy's fortifications for potential weak points. Caesar had noticed that the enemy's defenses closest to the river Nile was where he would find opportunity. This section was defended by fewer men and allowed for a path to completely outmaneuver Ptolemy's dug-in troops stationed on the barricaded hilltop. Ptolemy's main army was heavily influenced in the ancient Hellenistic style of war. It represented one of the strongest armies the Ptolemaic kingdom had fielded in decades. Thousands of Macedonian-style phalanx pike infantry, loyal Egyptian soldiers, and veteran Greek mercenaries made up their ranks. Roman allied troops ascended up the hill in good order. The Ptolemaic commanders were surprised seeing the Romans advancing on their position. With numbers and terrain on their side, it would have seemed like a straightforward victory for them. But they were not dealing with any ordinary army. Roman legions were focused on the hilltop, whilst auxiliaries and allied troops were sent to deal with the smaller Ptolemaic defenses near the river. With the clash underway for the Ptolemaic left flank, the Roman legions at the center halted their advance. Caesar's plan was to break through this section before he would utilize his legions, as attacking from the front without additional support against a fortified wall of phalangites was sheer suicide. The allied Roman troops pressed hard, but the Ptolemaic garrison put up a stubborn defense. But as the fight dragged on, the Ptolemaic troops were outwitted. They lost ground and opted to withdraw further up the slope, closer to the safety of their main army. Seeing the left flank being breached, the Roman commanders advanced their legionaries into the battle. Arrows, stones, and javelins rained down on the veteran troops as they crawled up the steep slope. Scores of men fell from the relentless storm of missiles. As the legions closed the distance, the Ptolemaic phalangites lowered their long sarissa pikes. The legionaries responded in turn by loosing their pilums into their ranks, causing disorder and a loss of cohesive phalanx formation. The legions pressed relentlessly against the enemy lines, but the combination of stout fortifications and disciplined phalangites held them at bay. On the opposite flank, Rome's allied troops once again attacked the Ptolemaic left, but were likewise unable to make any headway. Their assault was repulsed, leaving the Roman army without a decisive advantage. With the center stalled and the allied advance checked, the legions could only place their hopes in a breakthrough on the left flank. Seeking to turn the tide, the allied cavalry launched a flanking maneuver around the Ptolemaic position. Before they could strike, however, they rode into a storm of missiles from the Ptolemaic skirmishers. Javelins and arrows tore through their ranks, breaking the momentum of the charge and forcing the surviving horsemen to withdraw in disorder. The attempt to outflank the enemy had failed, leaving the Roman army with few remaining options. The Roman legions in the center could not break through the Ptolemaic defenses. Held at bay by determined resistance, they were gradually forced backward as the battle threatened to slip from Caesar's grasp. Then, at the most critical moment, the deadlock was broken. On the left flank, Rome's allied troops finally forced their way through the enemy line and burst into the Ptolemaic camp. After regrouping, they wheeled back and launched a fresh assault against the exposed left flank of the Egyptian army, smashing through its defenses. This was the turning point of the battle. Without hesitation, the Allied troops turned inward and struck the embattled Ptolemaic army from the rear. Caught between Caesar's hard-pressed legionaries to the front and the Allied attack behind them, the Egyptian line collapsed. The Ptolemaic army dissolved into a panicked rout. Soldiers fled toward the river in a desperate attempt to escape, but the narrow bridges and overcrowded boats quickly became death traps. Men shoved and trampled one another into the Nile as overloaded vessels capsized beneath the weight of men. Thousands drowned in the chaos. Among those attempting to escape was King Ptolemy XIII. According to the ancient sources, the young king boarded an overcrowded vessel which overturned under the weight of its passengers. Dragged beneath the waters of the Nile, Ptolemy drowned, and his body was later recovered. With their king dead and their army destroyed, Egyptian resistance collapsed. Caesar had secured a decisive victory, ending the Alexandrian War and firmly establishing Cleopatra VII as ruler of Egypt.